So to transition, I'm just going to introduce what's going to be an interesting kind of panel discussion. I'll talk about the format for a moment. The topic is on climate equity. The panelists are going to be focusing a lot on sea level rise specifically, but I think this idea of bringing an equity lens, we can think about across all the different topics related to Humboldt Bay. And a little bit of the inspiration for this, I don't know if Kristen is in here, but for those who don't know me, my name's Laurie Richmond. I'm a faculty at the Department of Environmental Science and Management at Cal Poly Humboldt. I'm also an extension specialist with California Sea Grant and co-chair with Adam Canter of the Cal Poly Humboldt Sea Level Rise Institute. And Kristen is one of my previous graduates who's now in the world of running symposiums. And she did work looking at opportunities and challenges around coordination and planning for sea level rise on Humboldt Bay. And as a part of that effort, she conducted a survey of 107 coastal professionals, so people who are working on planning, science, and activities related to the coast of Humboldt Bay specifically. And one of the really interesting findings from her survey, she asked the question of level of an agreement with the statement whether sea level rise planning processes on Humboldt Bay have sufficiently incorporated equity and social justice considerations. And so a lot of you probably in the room are among those professionals that took this survey. But only 4% agreed or strongly agreed with this statement. And so I think this was a clear directive that this is something that we need to get better at, and we need to learn, and we need to do more of. In her survey, another kind of interesting data point was she collected demographic data of these coastal professionals. And I think something interesting, people who are working on bay issues around the bay are majority white. And so there's a real interesting think and conversation around kind of whether the people that are working on these issues represent the populations of our state and of our community, and whether that's a conversation that we should be having. So we took kind of inspiration from these findings, and my next student, Nayre Herrera here, who's just finishing her thesis, was like, we need to learn about equity and how we can get better at it, especially around sea level rise. And we need to start having this discussion here locally. And so you're going to see work from her thesis, which was actually talking to experts from other part of the states who are doing this work, and what are some of the best practices and lessons learned. And a real goal for us was just to start the dialogue, and that's kind of what we're doing here today. So the way this panel is going to be structured is that we're going to have a set of 4 lightning talks that are 6 minutes each. Unfortunately, one of our panelists had to cancel due to travel concerns. But Nayre Herrera, my grad student from Cal Poly Humboldt, is going to start. Bill Matsubu from Blue Lake Rancheria is going to talk about some of the work they have going on. Hank Seeman from the Humboldt County Department of Public Works, Megan Acevedo from the County of Humboldt, and myself are going to give a short presentation about some of the county's upcoming plans. And then Adam Canter from the Wiyot tribe will end with a presentation. After that, we're going to have a panel. We'll all sit here in the hot seat. We'll have a bit of a panel discussion. Nayre is going to ask us a question or two. The panelists will respond and have a bit of a dialogue. And then we really want to open it up to the room. I think this is a conversation that we all want to have, for people to ask questions, but discuss what are things, how can we get better at doing this work. And with that, I'm going to hand it over.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you, Laurie. As you mentioned, my name is Nayre Herrera, and I am a second-year graduate student at Cal Poly Humboldt in Dr. Richmond's research lab. Today, I'll be presenting on a part of my thesis research titled From Vulnerability to Equity, Rethinking Adaptation to Sea Level Rise in California. I do want to take a second to acknowledge our funders that include Cascadia Coastline and Peoples Hazards Research Hub and California Sea Grant. So Laurie did an excellent job of explaining how my research was inspired by Kristen Orth's former graduate work. I want to start by providing some more specific context to situate my research project in both time and space. So recently, the state of California has been adopting legislation that directs public agencies to consider equity and environmental justice within their climate adaptation strategies. This is a great, strong step in the right direction, but the language in the policy remains vague. It's important to note that there are benefits to high-level policies remaining broad, as they can't adequately address those local or regional contexts that exist in those contexts. So because of those high-level guidance language, there isn't a lot of specific direction on how the directives should be translated into practice. So the goal of this work was to speak with coastal equity experts, review relevant documents and policies, and learn how people are practicing equity in the coastal management context, and put together a roadmap or guide for coastal professionals. So an overview of my research questions and objectives. The aim, again, of the research project was to explore how equity and environmental justice practitioners in coastal management are defining and implementing equity within the context of their work, and also identify the strategies, the barriers, and challenges that exist to challenging equity. An overview of the methods that I use to address my research questions and goals include document review and analysis of state-level equity, environmental justice guidance documents, and policies. This was often agency-specific plans, as well as state-level SLRI guidance documents and policies to understand how equity and environmental justice was being framed, if at all, within these documents. This informed the baseline understanding of how agencies are defining and implementing equity within the parameters of their agency's mandate. I coupled this with semi-structured interviews with equity and environmental justice practitioners connected to coastal management and planning at the state or regional level. In total, I spoke with 17 individuals across 11 agencies or organizations. Interviews were used to dive deeper on topics identified within document and policy review, and also learn valuable insights from practitioners doing the work on the ground. So an overview of the two findings that I will be discussing today. First, we'll look at the dimensions of equity that continue to occur in interviews and documents, and then an overview of the equity roadmap. So how are practitioners defining equity within coastal management, policy, and adaptation? Results pointed to two main dimensions, the first one being a historic dimension. Interviewees highlighted the importance of acknowledging the historical context that frames an equity conversation, how past and present day government policies and actions have contributed to the marginalization of certain communities and segments of the population. Therefore, different communities will have varying starting points as they enter the adaptation planning conversation. Practitioners also noted that the historical framing can help people understand why we are talking about equity and environmental justice today. Building on that first dimension, the second dimension of equity calls for special attention to the importance of equitable distribution of resources. Calls for coastal professionals to apply an equity lens to how we distribute resources, protections, benefits, and also burdens. Both interviewees and documents pointed to this as critical to ensure we are preparing everyone, including our most at risk or vulnerable, who may need more support in the community than is less vulnerable, to adapt and be climate resilient. The second finding I will discuss is the equity roadmap. So this is meant to be an overview of the many opportunities within a project or process where equity can be included. Here we see an overview of the various opportunities before a project is even starting to be designed. There are also opportunities early in a project or process, and then there is a key opportunity for equity to be considered or to be at play throughout a process. And we'll zoom into the meaningful engagement and collaboration. So what are the different ways that a practitioner can practice equitable community engagement and tribal engagement and collaboration? It's important to sustain engagement within the affected community throughout a process, and we can aim to accomplish this by asking, are we building in opportunities and funding for communities and tribal partners to provide input? Are we being transparent about how community input will be addressed? Are we thinking about and addressing accessibility issues? Are we sharing decision-making power? Meaningful engagement isn't a new concept. People have been talking about how important of a role this should be playing in our planning processes. I believe this project just solidified the understanding that equity is just as much about the process as it is about the outcome. Processes or projects designed with equity in mind are more likely to produce equitable outcomes that communities that can get behind and support. And adaptation planning processes should aim to center the people most affected by any specific project or strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Matsubu. I'm the environmental director for Blue Lake Rancheria. And I'm not going to talk so much about equity, but I'm going to talk about some of those actions of one of the underrepresented groups. And that group is a tribal nation. I work for the Blue Lake Rancheria. They are a federally recognized Wiyot area tribe. They were established in 1907 on a pretty unproductive parcel of land and on floodplain. They were terminated in 1958, but then reinstated in 1983. This group of homeless Native Americans who have built this huge institution that has award-winning climate actions in the past. Some of those award-winning actions were we're a leader in climate action. We are a climate action champion. That was an award that was presented from Obama back when politically it was a little more simpler time, it seemed like. We also have a lot of activities. We're known as being a hub for emergency services, especially when catastrophic wildfires. We're geographically located pretty well to service a lot of those displaced people. During earthquakes, we have the right kind of electrical infrastructure that our microgrid and our generators will support lifeline sectors during that time. We're credited with several lives being saved after earthquakes due to having hotel rooms reserved for emergency services and people in need of that. We also have done quite a bit of climate planning and are currently doing some climate planning. We just submitted a priority climate action plan for the Environmental Protection Agency Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. And we're updating our climate adaptation plan right now, and we're expanding that to include a lot more. And we just broke ground just a few weeks ago on our TAM Resilience Campus. This is it's being sold as this incubator for green technologies to develop a workforce to for technologies that increase resilience to climate crises and more ones that reduce greenhouse gases. We also have done quite a bit of riparian restoration on that small parcel of land that Blue Lake Rancheria has been in stewards of, which help with non-point pollution prevention, but also some carbon sequestration. And we're currently trying to move more into the regenerative agriculture field, which we just hired a new garden manager. Some of the current activities that Blue Lake Rancheria is involved in is Blue Lake Rancheria has for a long time been actively protecting cultural sensitive resources around the bay. Blue Lake Rancheria does have tribal lands in trust in the Humboldt Bay area and Humboldt Bay watersheds, but those locations are confidential due to cultural sensitivity of those locations, and we've been stewarding those lands. And we consult on a lot of activities around the bay. We're big supporters of a lot of the Wiyot tribes activities for Tuluwat land back and a lot of letters of support for those kind of activities. We are pretty actively involved with engaging on the offshore wind and port development. Our sustainability director is presenting on session 5 on Saturday for tribal perspectives. We also have a Department of Energy fellow that's engaged of cleaning up some of those port activities, and a West Coast Ocean Alliance fellow that's spearheading some of these activities. Well, it's also fun to say that we're involved with what Michelle presented about, improving climate resilience on the North Coast, the tribal fisheries. I know she said that we will start in Humboldt Bay, but we actually did start yesterday. And that's so that photo, oh, does this work? Can you see that? Yeah. That photo is the team out there learning how to do EDNA sampling in the bay. That's actually near the Samoa boat launch. My team, like, we're saying that what we do, these are the people that are actually doing the work. We have Ava, Jacob, Alec is actually a graduate student with Cal Poly Humboldt. We have two exciting new hires. Aaron Monroe, who's actually with us today, he's a co-founder, he's our garden manager doing some cool regenerative agriculture stuff. And one of our newest hires is Michael Shackelford. He's a council member, tribal member, and I'm going to talk next right about kind of what he's going to be spearheading. So we talked about kind of the past, we kind of about the present, what we are doing, and now I'm going to introduce kind of what we want to do in the future. So Michael Shackelford, who is the council member that just joined our team, he's going to spearhead this lands conservation program. It's funded by a Sustainable Agricultural Land Conservation Capacity Building Grant. And in addition to lands up the Bottom watershed, we're going to focus on properties, low-lying properties that are vulnerable to sea level rise to kind of help with the big barrier of restoring these lands to private ownership. Also, Ali Toyofuku is kind of pioneering this really cool idea of like carbon sequestration as a mechanism for land back, is like using funding to reduce climate pollution. There's billions of dollars out there and trying to direct that more to around Humboldt Bay. There's another, we're also excited about this project. It's in partnership with the North Coast Water Board. It's this adaptation atlas to inform equitable-based climate adaptation. And I'll talk about that a lot more tomorrow, but thank you for your time.
Hello, my name is Megan Acevedo, and I am a planner at the Humboldt County Planning and Building Department. I am here to talk about the project that we have submitted with the State Coastal Conservancy for coastal resilience planning for frontline communities on Humboldt Bay. This project will incorporate the engagement of, I went too far. This project will incorporate the engagement of king salmon and Fields Landing community members, the local tribes, the County Planning and Building Department, the County Public Works Department, Cal Poly Humboldt, the Coastal Commission, and the Harbor District in order to develop sea level rise and flooding feasibility and vulnerability assessments specific to these areas. Here's a map showing the outline of Wiggy, the ancestral territory of the Wiyot people, and the project sites of king salmon and Fields Landing on Humboldt Bay. These two vibrant communities contain numerous residential, recreational, commercial, and cultural assets for the region, including a substantial portion of the county's affordable housing stock. According to the 2017 U.S. Census Bureau data, these communities are considered economically disadvantaged, with approximately 72% of residents meeting the federal definition of economically distressed. Due to geological and tectonic factors, these communities are experiencing some of the highest recorded rates of sea level rise in California and are so low-lying that parts of them already experience flooding during the highest tides of the year. Here's a 2023 aerial imagery of king salmon, which shows the canals that run through the community, and nearly all the homes in king salmon are waterfront. This photo is looking east towards the community of king salmon and shows the canal to the right. Here's another photo of the canal taken during tidal exchange. These canals are used recreationally for boating, kayaking, and fishing. Here's the local restaurant and community market. There are 2 mobile home parks in the area which provide housing for permanent and temporary residents. This slide shows Cod Street Trail, which provides beach access with a beautiful view of the mouth of the bay. The beach provides habitat for dune vegetation and other ecological resources. Here's an aerial image of Fields Landing and the Jimmy Smith boat dock on the bay. And this is just a photo of the neighborhood of Fields Landing and the local restaurant. And just some more pictures of the neighborhood and the housing stock located there. And this is the Jimmy Smith boat dock. And Hank will take it from here.
Thanks, Megan. So we're talking about a planning study that will kick off in the next few months. It'll go for a year and a half, and it's focused on the communities of King Salmon and Fields Landing. And it's a great partnership between the Building and Planning Department, Public Works Department, and Cal Poly. On behalf of Humboldt County Public Works, we manage county infrastructure and county-owned property. And between my department and my colleagues at Eureka and Arcata and the Harbor District, we're in the local agencies that are on the ground trying to transition from assessing sea level rise vulnerability to move towards adaptation. What kind of actions can we take to mitigate risks from climate change and sea level rise? And so my department will be involved in doing the technical analysis for this project, and it has two parts. Sorry. I just wanted to go through the kind of the tasks and approach. And this is based on a study that was completed 2 years ago for the Eureka Slough hydrographic area, Jacobs Avenue, Murrayfield Airport, the transportation infrastructure near there. In order to really understand flood risk, you need to understand the landscape context. And so that's looking at landforms and the physical processes that are, where water and actions of the bay are intersecting with the land. And so it's really important to understand the geomorphic setting, both today and what it's been historically, so we can try to understand how the landscapes evolved over time and then think about measures to make it more resilient. We'll also apply the best available hydraulic modeling. We're really fortunate to have Jeff Anderson's years of work building the hydrodynamic model for the bay. And it's really important that we look at total water level, and we think about not just still water elevations, but also ocean swells that can come in the mouth and wind waves and the effects that that can have, especially along the eastern shoreline. And with all these variables in terms of landforms, physical processes, different storm events, different sea level rise scenarios, it's really, what we found is it's helpful to organize that in terms of what we're calling hazard scenarios. And so we've applied that in the Eureka Slough area, and we'll be applying that for King Salmon and Fields Landing. And then finally, we want to look in a risk assessment framework in terms of what are the probabilities of these events happening, what are the consequences, what are the impacts to the communities, the infrastructure, the ecosystems. And then once we can understand that, then we can think about, are there measures that we can implement to try to address the highest priority risks. So these are just some images. This goes back to 1948, the shoreline. You see Fields Landing was an industrial area with residential a little further upslope. And then King Salmon did not exist at this time. It had just been diked off, and King Salmon has a long history of land changes due to construction of the jetties, dredging of the channel, placement of dredge spoils, construction of protective structures. So we really need to understand the history of the changes there. We're fortunate that Don Tuttle worked for the county for many years, really focused on gathering the history of King Salmon. And so we're going to be bringing forward his work and making that accessible and then applying that for this study. King Salmon's unique. Most of Humboldt Bay is a sheltered water, where really we're looking at still water and wind wave effects. But King Salmon is really just opposite of the mouth of the bay, and so there's unique risks that we need to account for there. And then this looks at Fields Landing. You can see there's more industrial and recreational properties directly on the shoreline. There's a whole network of levees and tide gates and culverts and ditches. We need to understand how that functions. And And these are often challenging situations where those facilities extend over a lot of different ownerships. So then we want to transition into thinking about adaptation. Once we've worked with the community, once we've gotten a better understanding of the vulnerability, we can try to think of different options for adaptation and then try to put that together into a framework. And then we want to match priority vulnerable sites with doing more developed adaptation planning. So we'll do 8 conceptual designs and then select 2 of those for a preliminary engineering design. So hopefully this will develop a strategy to go forward. It's going to be challenging. The hazards that we're looking at are vast, and that's going to require some very strategic thinking. And that includes thinking about multi-objective projects that combine with ecological restoration, trying to enhance coastal access and recreation, or doing other infrastructure improvements. I'll pass it on to Laurie to talk about the community engagement.
So Cal Poly Humboldt is really honored to be a partner in this work, and we're going to help lead a lot of the thinking about what is new ways we can innovate in community and tribal engagement and really bring the community along throughout this process. I'm going last because I think it helps to understand some of the risks, but community engagement is actually kind of first on the list of things we're thinking of doing. So this photograph is from a workshop that Alderon Laird and John Ford and others here helped run with the 2 communities, just introducing them to some of the sea level rise projections from their area, which they really hadn't heard about before. And I think this was a great start, but since 2018, due to funding and capacity issues, there really hasn't been a lot of follow-up. And I think there's a lot of questions remaining from the community and a lot of opportunity to hear from them more about their experiences. So what we're planning to do is the project includes funds to hire community and tribal liaisons from the beginning so that they'll have representatives from those groups in the room. One of the challenges of these 2 communities is that they're unincorporated. So they don't have a city government or even a community services district or sort of like any leadership entity to be involved in these discussions. So we kind of have to do work to build that community infrastructure and support it. We also will have community advisory committees that will be sort of funded roles to have set members of communities really workshopping and looking at some of our products. And I think we hope to have multiple touch points with communities. We hope to actually start the project not with us presenting data, but with listening to them. So what are some of their stories? They live with flooding every day, every year. They have amazing stories of adapting around it, and there may be some residents out here. We'd love to hear your stories. And then a touch point to interact with these vulnerability assessments. There's new sea level rise projections since 2018, so there can be some more fine and detailed data to interact with. And finally, having the community interact with flood mitigation and adaptation options and prioritize kind of ones and think about sort of maybe phased adaptation strategies. So with that, I think we just want to thank you. But if you do live in Fields Landing and King Salmon, we'd love to hear from you. So please come up after and let us know. We're really excited to kick off this activity.
All right, hello again. Well, I don't have a very high-tech presentation, just some pictures to remind me to talk about certain things. And the Wiyot tribe have been working on their climate change adaptation program since around 2020, but since time immemorial. This is a picture looking at Tulawat in really the heart of Wiggy, out towards the Wiggy Dunes and the southernmost extent of beech pine and Sitka spruce forest on the west coast. In an area that's really the center of the Wiyot universe where the world renewal ceremony takes place. Cool image there. And it's funny, I think I put this on here thinking it was Alderon's photo. But if you notice, it's a little crooked. So I think this is my photo. But you'll see a nicer one. And this is from a king tide event out at Tulalot. The tribe has, really close to 100 cultural sites around Wiyot that are vulnerable to sea level rise, some even as low as 0.5 meters. Tulalot was one of the well-known land back stories. The tribe used bake sales to be able to buy back 1.5 acres where the World Renewal Ceremony takes place, which is the more upland area and Shell Mound in this photo. And then it was the first kind of municipal land back where the city of Eureka gave back over 200 acres, almost 300 acres of the island, much of which is salt marsh, which is a really important habitat type in the Wiyot. The tribe also, is highlighting land back is important. This was a contaminated site on the bay from almost a century of dry dock operations. And what did the tribe do when they got it back? Well, they got the first EPA site restoration reward for restoring the site, completely remediated the soil. There were retaining walls built of marine batteries, and as Mike Wilson said, this was one of the first living shoreline projects on Humboldt Bay as part of that restoration project. A lot of people in here were involved with that. And this is tribal citizen Helena Wilkinson and former Wiyot natural resource technician Brianna Phillips taking water quality samples. Right now, there was a lot of discussion about Syncoos and how important water quality monitoring is around the bay for folks, especially like Jeff Anderson and his model, use some of the data from a long-term water quality monitoring station that right now we're working to redeploy after getting some new equipment. And I always show this picture in almost every talk. This is Mad River Annie. We out at Bodawat Beach. And just kind of illustrates just generations of traditional ecological knowledge. She's got surf fish drying on these planks in the background and lots of different basketry species, Sitka spruce, hazel. And what you won't see in this photo is European beach grass. This was before our dunes had really been invaded by beach grass. And what's really exciting is data from the Humboldt Coastal Resilience Project, which is a long-term monitoring project of the Eureka littoral cell that a lot of people here have been involved in, has showed that removing European beach grass makes our dunes more resilient to sea level rise and able to migrate inland, reducing beach erosion. I think this was a slide someone showed earlier. I think I got this from Alderon too, but it's looking at ancestral territory, just kind of from the shore, the ocean perspective. Which really encompasses the Wiyot and Eel River and Bodawat estuaries, the Bear River Ridge down by Cape Fortunas, Centerville Beach, and a lot of our region. I think someone said they have their favorite little places around the bay, and this is the bay kind of broken into different primary sections: South Bay, Eureka Bay, Elk River Slough, Eureka Slough, Mad River Slough. Noting sea level rise, I think this is the 0.5 meter, and so it's going to reclaim a lot of the areas that were diked off at the turn of the century. One of the really exciting projects that the tribe was just able to achieve with a bunch of partners in this room was using state funds through the Ocean Protection Council Environmental Justice Program to reclaim almost 50 acres of coastal land right near the king salmon and Fields Landing communities at Marashawak and tribal cultural property. In 22, there'll be more talk about this maybe later, but it's a great example of kind of leveraging partnerships to be able to do land back, and also really looking at land return as a sea level mitigation to sea level rise. This area has both lowlands that are going to be inundated by sea level rise, but also uplands, allowing for migration of those wetland habitats inland and providing critical habitat for species that are going to need to adapt and acclimate to sea level rise and climate change. Wiyot country is, of course, super diverse. One of the most noted adaptation strategies of the tribe is to really try to reclaim all the different habitat types around Wiyot and ancestral territory that are, of course, tied to cultural activities that have been passed on for generations. And I talked about the World Renewal Ceremony. A great place to learn more about Wiyot culture is to come out to the annual Wiyot Day event that happens the third weekend in August. So I invite everyone to come out. I talked about salt marsh restoration. Right now there's big efforts to remove Spartina densiflora on Tuawat and as baywide eradication, which helps to protect some of our special status salt marsh species like Humboldt Bay's owl's clover, which is starting to bloom right now out in the marsh, and point raised bird's beak, both special status species that the tribe stewards out on Tuawat. Other areas vulnerable to sea level rise include areas on Hickshari or Elk River, where there's these unique hazelnut stands, and some of the upland habitats and important cultural plant communities that the tribe has identified as high priority with adapting to sea level rise. And of course, tribes are being reached out to contribute and are contributing to climate change and sea level rise projects. And I encourage everyone to reach out to the tribe and briefly mentioned how important dune restoration I think is going to continue to be as an adaptation strategy. That's it.
Hi. Well, I want to start by saying thank you to all our panelists for agreeing to participate today. That was wonderful to hear what everyone is up to. So this question that I have for the panel discussion is kind of a bucket of questions. So you take what feels good and run with it, okay? So can each panelist take a few seconds to reflect on the state of coastal resilience planning across Wiyot to date? Now, looking forward to the Bay's future, what type of projects would you like to see? What resources or actions are needed to build coastal resilience for all Wiyot communities? What are your priorities? Can you name one thing you want to ensure Can you name one thing you want to see to ensure that sea level rise planning benefits everyone?
Let's start with an easy one. One thing I forgot to mention, Helena Wilkinson conducted a bunch of interviews with tribal citizens about climate change and sea level rise, and noted that if the Wiyot had never been removed from Tuawat, it would be much higher elevation now due to continuing to harvest shellfish. But I think just involving the tribe in climate work, around the Wiyot, and really early on when projects are in the planning and kind of conceptual phase, reaching out to tribes and bringing them in to have them contribute. I think we all work better as a team. Everyone has their own specialties. And I also forgot to mention about some of the early climate work. The tribe helped out with some of Frank's research on eelgrass, and has worked with Alderon looking at sea level rise and its vulnerability to cultural sites around Humboldt Bay. And I think there's just need to continue supporting monitoring around the bay to do another shoreline mapping assessment, and just on opportunities to collaborate on land return. And
yeah, I guess I'll go to me. Yeah, thanks, Adam. I guess from my perspective, the future, it'd be great to like demystify the sea level rise planning and the restoration process. Because I'm not a professional for sea level rise stuff, or not a professional. Yeah, it's not in my expertise, but I'm interested in it. I know it's really important, and the tribe that I represent. So simplifying that process, making it more accessible is really important. Because you know, it's easy to look at some of the presentations and be like, wow, those are a lot of figures, a lot of numbers, a lot of modeling, and that kind of information is really important, but it's intimidating to a lot of people too. That step to like simplify it, make it more like interpretable is I mean, I did like the presentation where it said wind a lot. I understood that really well. I also think, you know, this, because I'm new to this, but I'm understanding it, this kind of stuff takes a long time, a lot of work for each project. So like being able to work collaboratively, but like promote other groups from like being in that space. Because it's hard work, it like, one project can just consume a department or a group's like time and capacity. So like having that room to work alongside each other is going to be important.
I'll share a few things that I think are important. I mean, number one, just in this domain, it's very interdisciplinary. And so one person can't know all the fields. So to the extent that people have diverse worldviews and really like to explore different disciplines, I think that's going to be a strength. It's also clear to me that, you know, a generation is not going to solve everything. Maybe the next generation of practitioners just try to make incremental progress and then trust that they can carry forward. That's important. I also think it's important that we try to find a way to do incremental projects that we can build some hope and take action, feel good about taking action, not being overwhelmed with despair. Yeah, I think just the fact that SLRI also involves just being aware of the health of Humboldt Bay community. And so to the extent that we can do the baseline monitoring, science, and just advancing understanding, that provides opportunities to get a lot of diverse groups and people involved. And do that with cohesion and also just a sense of work.
I would say that from my more recent experience at the county, important to provide a safe space for open discussion, for people to come and talk about their knowledge, to share their knowledge, and to also allow for effective community engagement. I think we can all learn from each other, and I think that it's important for us to focus on our similar priorities as opposed to our differences. And I think that that will get us very far.
I agree with everything they all said. I'm a social scientist, so I kind of think through that lens, but I really think that and I'm excited to innovate on this new project, but investing and experimenting with new strategies for community engagement, and not be afraid to maybe mess up and learn. And I think what's so fascinating, like I go into all these conferences with people and nobody actually knows what to do and how to work with communities that are facing this flooding or what's the best answer. And so I think we are gonna have to learn, and we have the opportunity to be leaders in our region, and I think that's really, really exciting. I think supporting community capacity development to engage is really important, and that is really a financial support. Enabling tribal leadership, like I am so jazzed by what Blue Lake Rancheria and the Wiyot tribe are doing. I love the idea of coupling land return with sea level rise adaptation and restoration, that I think tribes can overcome some of the timelines and burdens and things that we haven't been able to make progress on moving forward on some restoration activities. And looking at that example of Tuluwat land return and how that site was required and then cleaned up, and that's actually was a gift to the rest of us, because that's already facing flooding from sea level rise, and that's like contaminants that could have been in our bay that are not in our bay. And there's many more sites in our region like that, which I can tell you all about them. And I'm going to go rogue and turn on the moderator. But I just was really struck looking at that slide from Kristen's study about representation in our coastal planning and professional staff. And I think diversifying our staff is, folks who are working on this, I hope the university can be an engine for that. We have a very diverse student body, first generation students, underrepresented students, and they're hungry and creative and have so much to bring. And but Nay, you've gone out and talked to a lot of agencies that are thinking about this and have been implementing things, and I'm curious what others have told you, or what are some best steps or practices that can happen to diversify some of the staffs working on these issues.
Laurie. So some of the things that did come up, recruitment and retention practices were a big hurdle. You can recruit people, but if you don't think about the work environment, what cultures are kind of being considered and respected in those spaces, people are not going to stay in places where they're not feeling valued, where they can't show up with their whole identities. And so that was one part of that. Another thing that came up was when you bring people in that have lived experience, that are representative of the communities that you're serving, you may not have to invest in much, like to train people why equity or environmental justice is important, because they have that inherent understanding as someone from an underrepresented identity. And so that was another thing that they touched on. What else did you ask me?
That was it. I think that was great. Yeah, we're going to have a Q&A, but we're about ready to that. I don't need that. I'm not enough. I think for the recording.
Hi, Dr. Suzanne Sarli, co-founder of Pathways of Purpose, a STEAM educational organization. We're fledgling, a few years old. This is for everyone, but you in particular, you were talking about funding models, and you were just touching on that too. So what impact on generation and ownership of climate change solutions, how is that impacted by that vague language you described? Because in nonprofit funding, you see the language say, to benefit underserved or frontline communities. Who actually gets that money is the question, right? And so therefore, where is the knowledge being derived from? Who is really benefiting? So do you have any feedback around those questions?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. I think when the language is vague, there are benefits to that, because an entity can make the argument that these people are underserved because X, Y, and Z, and so therefore you should direct that funding to us to be able to do this work with the community. Someone else want to take a pass at that? Or do you want to ask more for clarification?
Well, conversely, it can also be problematic because more homogenous centered or white centered, we can say the words, organizations can then receive funding and say, we're going to solve these problems for these communities with these like limited pockets of funding allocated for them, instead of those frontline communities actually, creating the solutions themselves. So that's sort of more what I'm asking.
I think that touched a bit on the slide where we're talking about grant makers and the language that they use when they're putting out these calls, right? And so I think there are a lot of opportunities there, people, grant funders, funding agencies, to include language, show us who you're working with, what organizations are you working with, what community leaders are you working with, and have that be as part of the justification or how you award points that makes one project more competitive than another. And so I think that was a big part that came up that can happen at like an organizational or agency level, and that's happening in the background before we even get to the project scale. And so that's one thing,
Yeah, I'll just add, I think in your work too, there's some like internal conversations around grant making that like it's like the same cast of characters is getting the same funding, and even if it says equity, they just realign their priorities and thinking about how can you open that space up and create these requirements. And I think too, there's a statistic from this Washington Post op-ed that climate adaptation projects in 2018 devoted about 2 to 5% of their budget to community engagement, and a recommendation that should probably be 40 to 50%. And you can go to like a community meeting, and the people that are being paid to be there are the staff, and the community is there voluntarily for free. So thinking about how I think a lot in like, how do we re-budget? How do we have new budgets? How do we have transparency in how we build budgets? But that needs to be compensated work. And I think that's some things that came up. Does anyone else have?
I will add that it did come up that when it comes to certain funding streams, especially from government, there are limitations on what you can use that money for. But I think people talking about that being a restriction, you're naming the problem. And so what are we going to do to then adjust that if we know we need to do that, to do this equitably and do it well?
We're full on in Q&A mode. I think David has a...
I just want to say something real quick on that last point. I think it's really important when you're doing that grant making to think about providing internships for underserved communities and Native American communities, both youth internships, but recently I've been getting requests from the council to provide internships for all ages, and how important it is to have diverse ages contribute to a project, because it's a different perspective.
Thanks. David Loy, I work with the city of Arcata, and I feel compelled to weigh in on this because this is a critical issue, and grants are being structured to require partnerships. They're being structured to require more participation of vulnerable communities. And we recently were able to, city money, partner with Equity Partners, a firm that's directly involved in this type of engagement, building the type of relationships that government can't build real easily. Real participation in developing policy. And so that was something that we did with our own city funds, and part of that was providing a stipend for the participants, because we consistently heard in our engagement, preliminary engagements with people, exactly the point that you're bringing up. So the reason why I feel compelled to talk about this is because out of that work that we've done, progress we've made, but also to let people know, maybe the panelists and everyone else, we were successful at convincing the Coastal Commission with a recent awarded to do the same work with Coastal Commission funds. Point, these funds often have a lot of strings attached. And in working with our Coastal Commission representatives, we pointed out that the grant requirement was to engage. We provided this information, our experience, and that we had consistently heard that they need to be paid to be engaged. And they were compelled. They allowed us to write that into the grant. And so things are changing. So the question is to comment.
I think we envision this as a discussion. So if folks have things they want to comment on work they're doing as well as questions, I think we'll happily take both.
Hi, my name is Gail Harrison. This is really loud. And I am a community member. I spent my professional life, race relations, trying to help white people understand our role and responsibility in the racial equity movement. And I heard someone talking about building on our similarities. I think it's really critical that we also recognize our differences and honor those, that we understand communication styles might be different, that leadership styles might be different. And it's really critical, I think, that at the very base level, you build that trust so that you can then engage more diverse populations in the work.
Hi, folks. Ooh, this is an extra loud mic. I am interested to know, after seeing Jeff's presentation about increase in precipitation over time, some of these other changes, and we know we're likely to experience more extreme weather patterns, and we're seeing things like impacts to roads and expensive properties and public resources when it comes to erosion, when it comes to, the impacts to communities. And I know we're doing this dutiful, thorough work around understanding impacts, but in Fields Landing and King Salmon and beyond. I guess my question to all of you is, what is your take on addressing what I see as the big elephant in the room around people that have a lot of money and influence and land and want their needs served, and folks who may not have the ability to adapt as readily? How do we, that's no small feat, but what are your thoughts on how to square those two things?
We tax them now. Yeah, I think that's a tough question. I know, a lot of our vulnerable ranch lands around Wiyot and Humboldt Bay are in large tracts by not very many owners. And so I think it would be wise for their community to start thinking about strategies to get those lands into conservation for sea level rise adaptation, and coerce them to give them back to the tribe.
Yeah, and this is not necessarily answer to your question, but more an observation. It does seem like I'm inspired by the actions and the energy of some of the younger generations to overwhelm that wealthy influence. So it does seem like that's not the only thing that's moving the ship right now. I'm inspired, and hopefully everybody keeps pushing.
I'll just note that definitely certain areas, and I think Fields Landing, quite historically, one of our principles is to go forward. We don't want to make adaptation too expensive. Clients or barrier for smaller property owners. We need to have that.
The first thing that came to mind was just increasing transparency in politics all the way through. You can't get away with what you can't hide, like favoritism in that sense. And the other thing that comes to mind is, if it comes back to me, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I got it first. I want to ask about a marginalized community that's often forgotten about in these conversations, and that's disabled and chronically ill folks. I'm wondering how these members of the community fit into sea level rise planning, especially around community engagement. There are folks that are not in this room today, I'm positive, because it's not safe for them. We all want to pretend like COVID doesn't exist anymore, and it very much does. And for some people, they can't take the risk to be in a room like this. And I'm sure in rooms in King Salmon and Fields Landing and places like that. So I love the idea of creating these safe spaces for community engagement. And I'm wondering how you're thinking about disabled and chronically ill and immune compromised folks.
Yeah, I mean, I think in King Salmon and Fields Landing, I mean, one thing, I had a student, Christina Kunkel, do work in King Salmon that this has kind of led to, of just talking about people of their experiences with flooding. And they just live it every day. They have tide tables like posted in their house, and there are certain times of day and of the year where they know they can't go anywhere, and they have waiters. But there's a lot of seniors that live in those communities, as well as disabled. We were walking through the town, there's someone in a wheelchair, and talked about kind of, so I feel like this is going to be a topic for us to think about how to engage and understand, and then as flooding becomes more frequent, really thinking about like emergency response and how folks are going to be able to get out. And I know something that we don't really know what we're going to do for engagement yet, but there isn't really a space in either of the communities. I mean, I think of Gills, maybe we'll try to do something at Gills, but that maybe doing some of that work outside, doing like a walking tour of the community with like, okay, these are the people from the public works who like manage a lot of these pieces of the project. Let's walk around and show us what's working and what's not working. So trying to, I think, have a lot of diverse strategies. Those are just a couple of like top of mind things that I've been thinking about. But that, I think that just gives me a little bit more thing in my brain that we could think more about that for sure.
Good day. I don't know that much about grants, but I sort of came to a conclusion in the late 80s about something. Anyway, I represented the North Coast Environmental Center at the Decade of the Rainforest Conference in Seattle in 1988 and the retreat afterward at Whidbey Island. And there was a nonprofit, I forget the name of them now, and they got a nice grant to put on that Decade of the Rainforest Conference and follow up. And the idea was to connect tropical and temperate forest struggles. And so apparently these grantors, they're happy to put on your Decade of the Rainforest Conference, but then that nonprofit was supposed to follow up, be the coordinator of tropical and temperate solidarity. Instead, they couldn't get a grant to keep up the work on tying those rainforests together. Instead, they decided they could get a grant they had a spirituality in the environment conference the next year, but I think the world might be in better shape if they'd continued connecting tropical and temperate rainforests. So do you notice some grants which initiate something, but then the follow-up doesn't quite come through because they want new subjects or something? Or may hope there's enough funding streams that you have more options here, but I sort of came to that conclusion in 1989 when they should have kept tying those rainforest struggles together.
I suspect there's probably a lot of people in this room can talk about, there's like a trendy idea and you get funding to do the first step, and then the new trending idea occurs and you don't have funding to do it in the long term. I think even of like Wayland's look at eelgrass monitoring and how it's been difficult to support that. And I don't know, I think a little bit about the tribes and how to maintain staff, you have to have this continuous cycle of applying for grants and to like move projects forward. You know, for sea level rise work, it's like a series of 5 balls in the air and you have to do all the reporting. So I don't know, maybe thinking about how you guys have navigated grant cycles and needing to keep applying and how to keep projects going. Maybe you guys could speak to that.
Well, the Wiyot tribe don't have a casino, but
nonstop work. And yeah, one day maybe we can get an endowment for climate adaptation, planning and implementation. So yeah, it's constant. That's all I'll say.
I'll keep my response about the casino kind of limited. My department is entirely grant funded or contract funded. So like what we do is we bring in and support ourselves with that. But that burden of grant admin, grant applying really takes away from like what we can accomplish. I know Adam is like a phenomenal botanist, and it shows like his passion is like all those plants he was showing in his presentation, but like him and I push more paper now than actually do what our previous professions are. I used to be, I say used to, I mean, I guess it's in my blood, a fish biologist, and now whenever there's fisheries work, I have my crew go out to do that. So and that's what our skills are. We've trained for many years to do those things, but now we're trying to push the tribe's mission by in this continuous grant cycle. So that's just part of it. We are trying to apply for larger grants and think about more sustainable funding sources, but I mean that's just a constant struggle. And in addition to us being more passionate about shiny new ideas, also grantors like to fund shiny new ideas too. So it's hard to get funding to maintain something. It's easier to get funding for this cool new idea. So we're trying to get creative and package maintenance of something into a cool new idea.
I'll just amend that reality is Megan and I are here because of a grant. I don't have any solutions on. I do want to recognize the stakeholder conservancy. I think really need in terms of funding needs, being attentive to local needs and priorities, working with us to steer funding to where we think is the biggest funding.
I just wanted to say as a director of a nonprofit that I've seen some change in this realm because a lot of agencies are funding agencies and foundations are thinking a lot about this. And so I've been in interviews where they ask what's the easiest grants that you've gotten? What processes would you recommend? And they're trying to make things a lot easier for people who don't have a lot of professional staff, and it's actually making things easier for me at times too. But one of the big things is the loss of operational grants, so operating expense grants. We all have to just be on this treadmill of project, and there used to be a lot of operating expense grants where they would just give you, here's $50,000, tell us in a year what you did with that, because we really like everything you're doing, figure out what to do. And I think that might be coming back a little bit, but all the equity and diversity committees and advisory committees and stuff, if people get asked to do those and they can do it, it's great. It's really helpful. Because I keep telling them, don't ask me. I'm not the person that you need to hear from. You need to ask the people and pay them, like everyone said. But I think it's changing a little bit, but it's going to take time. But anyway, I see a lot of change. Positive change.
I did want to circle back to your comment about having considerations for people with disabilities, and I think there's an opportunity in this upcoming project to have someone from that identity as an advisor, a paid advisor in that position who can bring those perspectives that we wouldn't inherently have ourselves because we don't live that life, right? And so that was just one thing that came to mind, and I'm sure I'll talk to Laurie about it later.
We have 1 minute left. Is there any last questions or comments before we can drink booze and look at posters?
almost talk myself out of doing this. But what I want to do is I want to thank all of you for what you're doing, because what you're doing is building on the work that has been done in a similar way in this county for a long time. And that's community development work to create a future that we want to see. And engaging with the community was the key. And when you look at Humboldt County, so much of what makes life wonderful here was done by people just like the ones in the front of the room who wanted to make a difference. And they used the community development models that allowed that to happen. And they passed the ideas into the community. They became things like the Arcata Co-op, the recycling systems in the county, and all of those, and the farmers markets, and all of those things went on and proliferated around the state. And from the state, they proliferated far and wide. The Eureka Farmers Market was one of the first 20 farmers markets in the state. The Arcata Co-op was one of the first natural foods supermarkets in the state. And what you folks are doing is exactly the same processes to create the things that you're concerned of for the future. And funding sucks. Getting community support works. Turning it into an integral part of our daily lives that people are willing to pay for is the real goal. So thank you so much for what you're doing. It does work. Keep going.
I think that wraps it up. Thank you, everyone, for a wonderful first day. There's 2 more days. Oh, a closing, some statements?
Hello. Okay. I also have to remember not to talk too close to this. So yeah, our poster session is going to run until 6:30 this evening. So if you're presenting a poster, go ahead and head back to room A and find your poster. There are beverages, so hopefully you have held on to your drink tickets, and there are snacks on the opposite side of the room. Enjoy.